Our Bible reading this morning is from Romans chapter 12, which you can find on page 1139. Romans chapter 12, starting at verse 1. Therefore, I urge you, brothers and sisters, in view of God's mercy, to offer your bodies as a living sacrifice, holy and pleasing to God. This is your true and proper worship. Do not conform to the pattern of this world, but be transformed by the renewing of your mind. Then you will be able to test and approve what God's will is, his good, pleasing, and perfect will. For by the grace given me, I say to every one of you, do not think of yourself more highly than you ought, but rather think of yourself with sober judgment in accordance with the faith God has distributed to each of you. For just as each of us has one body with many members, and these members do not all have the same function, so in Christ, though many, form one body, and each member belongs to all the others. We all have different gifts according to the grace given to each of us. If your gift is prophesying, then prophesy in accordance with your faith. If it is serving, then serve. If it is teaching, then teach. If it is to encourage, then give encouragement. If it is giving, then give generously. If it is to lead, do it diligently. If it is to show mercy, do it cheerfully. Love must be sincere. Hate what is evil, cling to what is good. Be devoted to one another in love. Honor one another above yourselves. Never be lacking in zeal, but keep your spiritual fervor, serving the Lord. Be joyful in hope, patient in affliction, faithful in prayer. Share with the Lord's people who are in need. Practice hospitality.
Thanks very much, Katie. My name is John Risbridger, one of the ministers here, and we're going to be spending a few minutes thinking about what this passage means for our lives and for our service of Jesus. So it might be good to have it open in front of you if you can. I guess it's possible, isn't it, for any of us to choose to live with the basic aim of trying to increase our popularity, our pleasure, our success, our achievements. We can live that way if we want to. If you do, it will probably keep you busy, it may well stress you out, and it probably isn't going to really satisfy you fully, but you can make that choice. You can live that way. Many people do. But there is another way. Last week, it was amazing on Sunday evening to hear Sanjay Mal's story. It was so powerful in real life. If you didn't hear it, please download it and have a listen. It was great. And Sanjay talked about how he had achieved academic success, how he was well on the way to acquiring the wealth that he longed for, and how he had taken every opportunity to make use of the pleasures of life that were open to him. But he came to a point in his life when he realized that, frankly, although it looked good, it didn't amount to very much. And he was looking for a different answer, a different way. And what he discovered is that there is a different way. We don't have to live that way. We got, I think, another glimpse of that different way last Sunday morning when John Kirkby was talking to us about the story of Christians Against Poverty and the lives transformed through that ministry across the country. It's the way that Sanjay has discovered as well. And if you listen to the words that he used, it's the way which, as he says, has completely changed his life. And as one of his friends, I can say that's clearly true. It has. It's the way that I see modeled in the lives of many people in the life of the church here, in the way that you seek to serve in your families, in your work, in your community, in our city, here in our church family. And it is the way of transforming service of Jesus. Transforming because Jesus is at its heart and Jesus is about change and transformation. And service because this way of living is about trying to express the values of Jesus and his kingdom as the King who came among us, as we've already reflected this morning, not to be served, but to serve and give his life to set us free. As I went through last Sunday and listened to all those stories from John and Cookie and Eugenia and from Sanjay in the evening as well, I found myself encouraged, inspired, and yet at the same time, really challenged. Just incredible stories of what God can do and does do when we have this combination of showing Jesus' love practically and explaining his truth clearly and patiently. And when those two come together, it really is transformational. And it's amazing to hear those stories, but at the same time, as John put the challenge to us in the morning, there is still so much to do in our city. So much to do. Thousands and thousands of despairing people who need to be offered hope. Lonely people who need to find community. Neighborhoods and networks of people that need to be impacted by the truth of Jesus. Divisions to heal, a city to reach, good news to share. So much still to do. There are several parts of our city which have no accessible, visible, active church which is passionate about the good news of Jesus. There are workplaces across our city which are poisoned by backbiting, cynicism, and low integrity that needs Christians to show a different way, a cross-shaped way. There are thousands of older people in our city, shut in, isolated, alone, and vulnerable. And they need a church family to love them. There are many young people that have no positive role models and who need Christians to love them and to give to them an inspiring, satisfying vision of life. There are many refugees who feel unwelcome and who struggle to adapt to a new language, context, and culture, who need our friendship, our support, our help with language. And there are many single parents battling alone with many of the challenges of life, who need to know that they can find a place of acceptance, friendship, and support among the people of God in his church. And all of those categories needing a Savior, Jesus, who is the true hope of our city and of the nations. There's so much still to do, and it's fantastic when we see God at work, but it's so challenging as well to think of all that still needs to be done. Can we make a difference? No. You didn't expect me to say that, did you? But no, we can't. Because we are not the answer. But Jesus can make a difference because he is the answer. And if together we are willing to re-engineer our lives around a vision of humble, relational, transforming service of him, he can use us to make a profound difference. Changing our city, as John reminded us so powerfully last week, one life at a time, which is the only real way to change the city. One life at a time, because the city is made up of people. Transforming, transformational service. I want to say 4 things from our passage this morning about that service. Number 1, begin with worship. And this is absolutely crucial. So if you don't know what I'm on about, just stay with me for a moment. Begin with worship. The founder of Apple, Steve Jobs, once said, if you're working on something exciting that you really care about, you don't have to be pushed, the vision pulls you. You got that? In other words, when we really grab hold of an exciting vision, we don't have to have people all the time telling us what to do and telling us to work a little bit harder. No, the vision pulls us because it's grabbed our hearts. Now, where can we find that kind of vision for transforming service of Jesus? A vision that pulls us, that draws us, that excites us, that we don't just have to drive ourselves into. Where can we find it? Well, by beginning where Paul begins, which is with worship. Romans 12, verse 1, therefore I urge you, brothers and sisters, in view of God's mercy, to offer your bodies as a living sacrifice, holy and pleasing to God. This is your true and proper worship. See, if you begin with guilt, you'll end up just resentful. If you begin with frustration, you'll end up just angry and angular. If you begin with trying to prove yourself, you'll end up isolated. If you begin simply with a sense of need, you'll end up overwhelmed and exhausted. But begin with worship. Begin with your eyes on Jesus, and you'll find a vision of service that draws you, where you can serve resiliently, with humility, and with energy. Did you notice how passionate Paul's vision is here? He says, therefore, I urge you, brothers and sisters. He's not saying, oh, if you feel like it, you might want to think a little bit about serving Jesus. No, it's passionate. I urge you, he says. Come on, get it. I urge you. It's passionate. It's also Jesus-centered. I urge you in view of God's mercy. And of course, this comes after 11 whole chapters in the book of Romans, where Paul has explained and described and unpacked the mercy of God in Jesus Christ so clearly. He's talked about how Jesus came and gave his life as a sacrifice on the cross for us, so that we could be forgiven and have a new start in our lives. That's the message of God's mercy, the gospel, the good news. And Paul says if we're going to serve, it must be with that message in view. That news which must be the foundation, the inspiration, and the aim of everything in our service of Jesus. It's Jesus-centered, but it's also a costly vision. I urge you to offer your bodies as a living sacrifice. And friends, what else could we do in response to Jesus, who offered his body as a sacrifice for us on the cross? It's the response that makes sense, isn't it? But when that motivates us, when right at our beating hearts is the story of the King of Kings who came not to be served but to serve and gave his life up for us, when that's our motivating heart, then service is no longer about what's convenient and comfortable. It becomes about giving up our lives in order to serve Jesus and his purpose in the world, because we know that he gave up his life to serve us. It's costly and it's responsive as well. He says, this is your true and proper worship, your appropriate, grateful response to all that Jesus has done for you. Begin with worship, and when that's your starting point, when that's your passion, when that's your model, you'll begin to find that vision of service that pulls you, that draws you, that motivates you inside. Begin with worship. Number 2, watch your attitude. This really flows from the first point, because if we're going to take the cross seriously, we're going to learn not to take ourselves too seriously. Verse 3, by the grace given me, I say to every one of you, don't think of yourself more highly than you ought, but rather think of yourself with sober judgment in accordance with the faith God has distributed to each of you. Or a better translation of that last bit, I think, is measuring yourself by the faith God has given you. In other words, by the cross, by Jesus, by what he has done for us. That's the measure of our faith. That's the measure of our attitude. That's what forms and shapes the way we go about serving. You know what it's like when you're working in a team with people, and there's one member of the team who treats the rest of you as kind of mere resources. Don't you hate that word, human resources? Yeah? But a person in the team who treats the rest of you as just kind of resources to fulfill their ambition. You know that feeling? It doesn't feel good, does it? Teams don't feel good when they work like that, as if everything is just all about them. It's so de-energizing, so unmotivating. But when we begin with worship, when we begin with the cross, when we begin with Jesus, we start to be freed up from being preoccupied with ourselves and threatened by the gifts of others, so that instead we can enjoy and celebrate and benefit from and embrace and harness and rejoice in the gift of others, even though those gifts may be very different to our own. Verse 4, because, Paul explains, just as each of us has one body with many members, there are lots of different parts of our bodies, and these members don't all have the same function, so in Christ, we, though many, form one body, and each member belongs to the other. In other words, Paul's saying, look, what's your attitude? Don't be threatened by difference. Don't be frustrated by difference, but embrace difference, because Even though going by yourself may take you faster, going forward together will take you better and further. Watch your attitude, he says. Be humble towards yourself and be honoring towards others. What's your attitude? And then verses 6 to 8, use your gifts. Use your gifts. Verse 6, we have different gifts according to the grace given to each of us. Can I just say, that's just a massively, massively, massively important verse to get hold of. We have different gifts. We're not all the same. Some of us are irritatingly different to other people. We have different gifts, and God did it. It's according to the grace God gave us. So if there's somebody in the church who is so different to you that frankly they wind you up to the hilt, before you explode all over them, please just remember, God did it. He made them like that. He gave them those gifts, and he wants you to honor them, not to freeze them out. God did it. He's given us different gifts according to his grace. God didn't make us to be someone else. It's a lesson I've been very slow to learn. I spent a lot of my life with a few kind of heroes who I looked up to and wanted to be like and tried to copy, and to be honest, didn't work very well. It really didn't. It took me a long time to find my own voice. But I had to realize God didn't make me to be someone else with their gifts. He made me to be me with my gifts. And the same is true for you. He made you to be you. He made you to use the gifts he's given you rather than longing to be somebody else. And we really need to come to terms with that. Otherwise, we'll spend all our time frustrated that we're not more like somebody else, or frustrated that others are not more like us. And neither of those is very pretty. So Paul says, use your gifts. And use them rather than envying the gifts of others. Maybe God gifted you to show mercy to others. That's one of the examples here. It's about practical help and service of other people. And that's what you're great at, just caring for people practically. But then you look at somebody else who's a teacher and you think, oh, it's rubbish what I do. I wish I could be a teacher. And Paul says, no, use your gifts. Use what God has given you to do. Or maybe your gift is to give because God has entrusted you with a lot of wealth. But you think, no, I don't want to do that. I want to be a servant. I want to get my hands dirty and serve other people in that very practical way. But to be honest, you might not be that good at that. No, use the gift God has given you. Give generously. Or maybe you're a leader, but actually you just want to spend all your time going around smiling at people and being nice to them. And God says, no, be a leader. Use the gift that he's given you. Take responsibility. The path to effectiveness and the path to joy is to accept the gifts God has given us and to use them. And then Paul says, keep the gospel central as you use your gifts. Verse 6, we have different gifts according to the gifts God has given to us. If your gift is prophesying, then prophesy in accordance with your faith. Prophecy is about speaking God's truth into a situation or into a person's life. But Paul says when you use that gift, or actually when you use any of the others, use it in accordance with your faith, or again, a better translation, according to the measure of the faith. In other words, the faith that you have in Jesus, let that shape the way that you use that gift, so that you speak about him, not about yourself, so that you take people to the cross, not just make them dependent on you. Keep the cross central. And then he says, use your gifts with passion. Did you notice that? Verse 8. If it's to encourage, then give encouragement. If it's giving, then give generously. If it's to lead, then do it diligently. If it's to show mercy, then do it cheerfully. Did you get those words? Generously, diligently, cheerfully. He's saying use your gifts and use them with passion. Use them with energy. Don't hold back. Use them in your home. Use them in your work. Use them in your community. Use them in the church. Use them in the city. Don't just give your gifts the fag ends of your time. Use them. Develop them. Don't go off in a huff when things go wrong. Use them with passion, with resilience. Use your gifts. And then finally, nurture your passion, because if you don't nurture your passion, you will burn out. Have a look at verse 11. Never be lacking in zeal, but keep your spiritual fervor serving the Lord. Keep your spiritual fervor serving the Lord. See, transforming service of Jesus is about more than duty. It's about more than just pressure from ambitious leaders. It's about more than just moral earnestness. Transforming service of Jesus is about passion. Just stay with me. It's about passion. Passion that comes from knowing who we're serving the Lord, end of verse 11. But the reality is that passion can too easily die. It dies if we're envying the gifts of others rather than using our own. It dies if we're doing too much because we can't say no, and so we just get exhausted. It dies if we let our attitude go sour and resentful. It dies if we strike out by ourselves and neglect team and relationships. And it happens. Passion dies far too much. And it especially happens to guys around about my age. I'm sure it happens to women as well, but I notice more and more guys in the middle of life like me, and their passion is dying, is diminishing. So I want to say to you, nurture the passion. Dig deeper into God. Step out of the comfort zone. Stop telling yourself that it's too late or too scary for anything to change. And dare to do something different, new, transforming, exciting, energizing for Jesus. And don't think that's a challenge for somebody else. Ask, what is God saying to you? Transforming service of Jesus. This morning, I'm going to be asking us to make a response. Alison will explain a little bit more in a moment with the form that was given to you when you came in. For some of us, it's going to be a response about transforming service in the way that we live life 24/7 in our workplaces, homes, and communities. For some of us, there's not going to be anything on the list that is quite us. And I'm going to encourage you to go to the fair at St. Mary's, 4 o'clock on Wednesday, where there are 30 different Christian ministries around the city being put on display. That's fine. But look, there is also a challenge to transforming service in and through the church here at Above Bar. And I want us to face that challenge as I finish. See, we have a vision to reach right across our city, and as part of that vision, it's only part of the vision, but as part of that vision, we're committed to launching Above Bar East over the next 12 months. And to do that, it's going to cost us, not just the people that live on the east, it's going to cost us all. There's going to be an implication. Let me illustrate. We need 8 new people to help in the creche there, 12 to help with the kids' work, 2 the youth work, maybe 8 to help with the music, 6 on PA, 10 on first impressions, 8 to set up. That's a lot of people, isn't it? But if we're going to do that, that's going to leave gaps back here, and we'll need people to step into those gaps. Kids work, first impressions work, ambassadors, duty managers, kids teams, music teams. There's lots that needs to be done. But can I say to you, church is so much more fun when you don't just come to watch it, but you're involved and stuck in. Honestly, it's a bit dull just sitting there watching, isn't it? I wouldn't want to do it. But when we get stuck in, when we're using our gifts, when we are part of the story, making the journey happen, that's when church will take off for you. But it's not just about reaching across the city and reaching to the east. We've also got a passionate vision for city centre ministry, which is critical. There is huge potential to build our United Parents work for single parents. It's unique in the whole of Hampshire, but we need more people to get stuck in. We need people with a heart to support single parents, and critically, hear me, we need people who are willing to work with the kids and the young people of single parents as we work with the parents. And many of those kids and young people would otherwise have no link into church. It's a cracking opportunity. We need folk to get on board. But a growing church also means a growing number of people to care for and support. So we need to strengthen our pastoral care team. There's room for lots of different gifts. We heard last week about the expanding opportunities through CAP, and we would love to build our ministry to older people in the city where there are so many social and spiritual needs. Friends, you can be part of the story. Please don't look around you to somebody else. You can be part of the story. And this morning you can take a step to say, yes, I'm up for it. Are you going to do that? Or are you going to hope that somebody else does? Transforming service of Jesus. Sustained by a worshiping heart, enriched by healthy teams, fulfilled because we're using our gifts, fired and fueled by passion for Jesus. That's the vision. It's really not easy. And it's not always going to make us popular if we do it. But I believe with all my heart that it is the best way to live. And the way that God is calling us to live. And friends, with the hundreds of us here this morning, if we all get stuck in, if we all play our parts, honestly, the difference we could make is phenomenal and transformational. Will you hear the call? Will you get stuck in? Will you bring your gifts? Will you play your parts? Transforming service of Jesus. Alison's going to lead us in our response.